like this, man. He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down in the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. The dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's like all the time.
All right, Kevin Dolan, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
Great to be here, man. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you back on. You've been on my show, albeit quite some time ago, so I'm happy to have you again. So since it's been a while, would you mind just describing, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I run Exit, which is a group of guys basically building sovereignty, building businesses, connecting and networking in kind of the right wing space. I run Natal Conference, which will be March 28th and 29th here in Austin, Texas. And just sort of I got doxxed and fired in 2021 in kind of the bad old days, and I've been sort of professionally online ever since. That's me.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear more about your conference. This is the second year you've held it, correct?
That's right.
So yeah, several things there. I'm interested, right? How does this kind of fit into the broader ecosystem? Because I've been going to more conferences recently. It's been a lot of fun to meet people face to face. And, obviously on one level, it's like going to a Star Trek convention, right? You get to see the people that you talk to on the internet, you get to nerd out a little bit. But yeah. I think there's actually something important about that. And maybe that's something you could speak to.
How it fits into the bigger picture is basically, I think that we are looking for what unites us. We're looking for once you win, it's like, what are you about? We've been very much defined in the negative for, at least a decade. And I think natalism, presenting the idea that your children, belong to you, that they should be a reflection of the things that you care about, and that you are part of something, that you belong to something bigger than yourself, that you are instantiating and extending into the future. It's a way of getting around, I think, the weaknesses of calling yourself a conservative. In the sense of being in this eternal battle against entropy. If your objective is to keep things the same, keep things the way you like them forever, it's a losing battle, and it's also like, even if you won, it would be kind of depressing. But kids are sort of there's sort of a combination, an intermingling of the things that you love and sort of the unknown, the uncertain, the future. And so like it's sort of a natural, it's a way to sidestep or avoid the failure modes of conservatism or reaction, where you're endlessly trying to build this zoo for this prior way of living that's no longer tenable. As far as how it fits into, like, I don't know, the scene, we're definitely connecting a lot of like traditional religious people with like tech accelerationist, like techno optimist, sort of right-wing progressive types, which that's been really, really fruitful, especially on this topic, this issue, because there are a lot of opportunities for those tribes to have conflicting objectives and butt heads. But this is a place where, everybody can, like, you can look at the spiritual side of this and talk about, like, well, if people aren't having kids, it's like evidence of a fundamental pessimism or a spiritual sickness, a spiritual malaise. But you can also just look at the stats and be like, hey, if we don't do something about this, like, all sorts of things about our society are going to go upside down. And so the last conference, people being humbled by the problem, people being rendered less certain, because like with this issue, a lot of things that you might sort of assume based on your priors, based on your ideological prejudices, things that you would assume are the problem. You can look at like countries where they actually aren't doing the thing that you think is the bad thing, and they still have demographic challenges. So by looking at this problem in detail and carefully, people are sort of able to break out of ideological cul-de-sacs and connect with each other, and that's been really, really valuable.
Yeah, there are several things there that I think are interesting. I want to pick at. You mentioned the kind of positive vision, because effectively our friends have been determined by basically who hates progressive nonsense.
Yeah.
Right. To such a degree that there was actually something identifiable as the anti-woke coalition. Right. And
Yeah.
this spanned everyone from the kind of like deeper, darker corners of the internet all the way to, someone like Joe Rogan, right? A very mainstream figure. And obviously, there's power to be had in a negative organization, right? We don't want that. Let's make it go away. And to a certain degree, that was successful in, on the electoral stage, getting Trump elected. Now, the problem is, right, what next, right? What do you do? And obviously, you and I, or really anyone else, has a lot of very specific things they'd like to see happen. But I recognize the importance of creating something that is easily supportable by all of those camps, both because it provides some kind of common ground, and also, the demographic issues are very real. And if there are none of you left, people, it doesn't really matter, all of those kind of finer details. It's a very deeply rooted issue.
And it exposes the failure of the sort of atomized liberal worldview, even on its own merits, even by its own standards, because this will not, this population decline will not save the planet. It will not make people happier in even the most just sort of short-term hedonic sense. Like it's the course that the blob, the thing that we're all opposed to, that the anti-woke thing is opposed to, it is steering off a cliff, and it's not something where we sort of have like a values disagreement where they're like, actually pride parades and drag queen story hour is super good, and we're like, no, but it's bad. Like that's one way you can sort of conflict in this culture war sense. But with this, it's like, no. Even just like the basics of existence, like you guys care about art, you care about, the environment, you care about people having enough food to eat. Like these are all sort of liberal concerns, and the course that you're on, the philosophical premises of the society you've built, is going to destroy all that. It's gonna sink all that. And so it's incredibly powerful, both as a way to connect that coalition, but also as a way to critique what we're up against. And it also, like, if you are sort of the biggest challenge that I've observed in trying to connect people who really believe in things is that they really believe in things. And so like, if it's Catholics trying to connect with evangelicals or Latter-day Saints or Jews or what, any people with like sincerely held metaphysical views that aren't liberalism, your stridentness, your commitment to those principles, in many cases, like gets in the way of cooperation. And so it's like what the blob has to their advantage is that they don't have any of those principles, and so it's very entropic. It's very like it's easy to collaborate on that basis. And so we we find ourselves needing something that we actually do all agree on. And it's like, this kind of frames it in terms of life and death, right? It's like, if you are the party that's in favor of continuing human existence, and your opponents are on the other side of that, they're opposed to that. Well, that's a very stark and straightforward banner to rally around.
Yeah, it's a remarkably strong moral argument. People should still exist.
Right.
Uh, and when you put it in those kind of plain terms, it's very clear. But this is one of the things that I have noticed in both the conversation around natalism, right? Like if you have a free afternoon and nothing better to do, the Reddit board anti-natalism is a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
Because there's this kind of extreme black-pilled progressive take that's been around for a very long time, right? You saw it in the 70s up to now, which is basically, humans are this stain on existence, right?
Mhm.
We are the cause of all the world's ills, and it would be better if we didn't exist. Now, obviously, the extreme case is some kind of like, radical eco-terrorist exterminationist plot, right? Something out of a Tom Clancy novel.
Right.
But the idea that you see in somewhere like Germany, with the my line ends with me advertising campaign,
Yeah.
or elsewhere, is this idea that humans are so messed up that I simply won't make more of them.
Mhm.
And that is the that is the argument that is put forth, right? But if you dig into it, right, if you read what these people post, what they think, what it basically comes down to is, I don't care about my posterity enough to in any way inconvenience myself, right?
Mhm.
The purpose of my life is to be kind of the ultimate atomized individual consumer, right? To fire off my pleasure neurons, the maximal number of times in my life.
Mhm.
And one of the advantages of the internet, right, is you get to see what these people look like and how they live. And it's perhaps one of the best the best counters to their argument is like, okay, you have all this freedom. You can do whatever you want. And what have you done with it? And the answer, by and large, is absolutely nothing other than just kind of like increasing consumption. And, aside from any kind of moral argument about why you ought to continue your line, uh, it's pretty easy to just say, well, look at the people who disagree with me, right? It's a pretty it's not a sophisticated argument, but it's certainly effective.
Yeah. I think COVID was a fascinating natural experiment in like this hedonic communist UBI, like, you know, there's that meme that's like, if you have to eat to live, it's like saying you don't deserve, like, you don't deserve to just exist. You have to like justify your existence. And like the commies throw that around like that's a really good point. And of course everybody on the right is like, well, of course you have to justify your existence. Like, of course you have to, like, that's just you're like mad at reality, mad at God, mad at your dad, whatever. And this is yeah, I mean, we're sort of up against sludge, right? Like that is certainly the case. But I think they're just depressed. Like I don't think that's a real ideology. I don't think it's a coherent metaphysics. I think they're just sad people. And in terms of the hedonic argument, it's like actually like from the inside of that worldview where life is kind of just about having, you know the simplest version of it is like having positive experiences, and then a maybe like more nuanced version of that is like having positive and interesting experiences. But if that's the point, then like, yeah, it actually doesn't make sense to dedicate 2 decades of your limited time on this earth to cultivating another person so that they can have hedonic experiences and so that they can go to Cabo or Mykonos and like have the Instagram photo op. Like, life has to be about something bigger than that in order for it to be worth continuing. And that's, not like we can dunk on the anti-natalists all day long, but like that is also kind of Nietzsche's perspective. Like, life is actually not self-justifying. And so like some extraordinary circumstances have to obtain for the drudgery and toil and suffering of life to be worth whatever you see as the meaning of it. And so like it's you know they are just kind of miserable people, but that is a serious argument that actually needs to be contended with.
Well, there's several things there, right? Which is one, the idea of justifying your existence is a weirdly decadent idea, right? It's like I do not simply need to exist, but I also need to think about it, right? I need to sort of provide some kind of rational justification, which seems to be a very alien idea to how people have traditionally thought, right?
Yeah.
Kind of a a system of, or a symptom rather, of modern excesses. And one of the things that I think about quite a bit is that, in a weird way, and I want to state this very precisely, uh, our demographic issues aren't the worst thing that could happen to us, right? Like the idea that you are basically on a population level selecting against susceptibility to this kind of like bizarre civic religion, right? That the people who are, whether by genetics or culture or, just personality, willing to buy into this are not reproducing. You can see this in the work of someone like Ed Dutton, right? Where he talks about, if countries such as ours were left in a vacuum, right? If there was no immigration, that they would dramatically transform over the next 3 to 4 generations, basically because liberals don't have children, right? They do not reproduce. And obviously that is, and I'm not trying to, turn Dutton into a crude straw man. He recognizes that assumes a lot of things. But there is something that I think is interesting, which is that like, it seems as if, whatever you want to call it, anti-natalism, right? Modernity, atomization, it is effectively a selection event, right? It is kind of a population level test. And, you mentioned earlier COVID, and I think COVID is a very clean example of that, right? And I noticed this because I'm in my early 20s, right? The population bifurcated, right? You had 2 completely different groups of people, one of whom was effectively living as normal, and the other one who became these kind of like bizarre Wall-E people, right? Strapped into their chairs, becoming overweight and, terminally addicted to their Skinner box. And I'm curious, right? Obviously, I would very much like to live in a healthy society that could reproduce. But given current constraints, I think that not all of the, let me say that in a more elegant way, the low birth rates are not a problem for everyone. That's going to get clipped. But do you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I guess what I would say is I look at this in the perspective of, these people come from people who were functional and healthy 200 years ago, and they have characteristics and aspects of their temperament that make them vulnerable to our present pathologies, but that are actually pretty worthwhile characteristics. And so like I don't reflexively despise them for being susceptible to what's going on here. I think Dutton makes interesting points about the relationship between intellect and sort of specifically like abstract intellect, the ability to sort of reason at a high level, and the propensity to conform and the propensity to concoct a narrative for yourself that allows you to snap into the social hierarchy, right? That higher intelligence does not make you iconoclastic. It actually, at least in like sort of the upper middle ranges, makes you more conformist. I mean, that's sort of the midwit meme, right? And like actually people being able to like snap themselves into a grid and work together in healthy times and healthy societies is good. And even apart from that, just like the correlation with like there are a lot of bright, ambitious, driven people who like that is precisely why they are getting opted out of the next generation, and that's bad. I'm not happy with that. I would like for those people to rediscover meaning, and I would like for them to fall in love, and I would like for them to raise beautiful, happy, healthy families. And you know, in the long run, does this problem solve itself? Kind of, in the sense that like you know, deer populations can eat everything there is to eat and then collapse and then slowly crawl their way back up again. Like, but you know, as a human being, like with a family and like caring what happens to the world around me, it's like you know, I don't want to have that crash. I don't want to have I don't want this to correct in the sort of Darwinian, like the harshest terms that it can correct. You know, I think these people could actually figure it out, and I'd like for them to figure it out.
All right, so let's run with that argument, right? Let's assume that, you know, those people can and should be saved, which is an argument I'm certainly sympathetic to. How do we do it, right? Because oftentimes what you'll see from the people who criticize, you know, your ideas in your conference is saying things like, well, this has already been tried, right?
Yeah.
You know, Hungary tried to do this, South Korea tried to ban porn, and nothing happened, right? So what's the move forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just talking to Rog nationalists about this yesterday, talking about the Romans and how the Romans pursued like aggressive pronatalist policies for like centuries, and like aggressive on a level that would never be allowed in a modern society, and it still didn't work. And so, yeah, I think the biggest category error, the biggest way people like think about this the wrong way, is they think of this as something people can be incentivized to do in a very like crude sense. They think about this as you need to put pressure on these people. You need to stress them out. You need to send women pictures of empty egg cartons, so that they will be duly terrified into, you know, because they don't want to die alone and they don't want cats to eat their face. And so that's why they should have kids. And it's like, people just don't, pandas don't even work that way. Like if you know, you're trying to get the pandas to breed and you're like, well, every day they don't breed, we're going to deliver them an electric shock. And every day they do try to breed, we're going to give them some more kibble. And it's like that, even that relatively simple creature will not respond to those incentives that way, because the reason they're not breeding is not like this crude logic of incentives. They're not computer programs. Like this is a creature that is in a profoundly artificial context. It is under stressors that it is not built or adapted to endure. And so the fact that it is struggling to complete its life cycle, like that's not it's not a reflection of that panda bear's inferior morality relative to its ancestors that were able to successfully breed. And B, it's not something that you can just sort of Pavlovian train into it. You have to actually address the environment. And so in this case, with our environment, I think it has a tremendous amount to do. And this is how I would connect it back to Rome and China and every other society that has had trouble with fertility. I think that there is very successful societies that have that have reached colossal scale because of their ability to cohere and their ability to ideologize their population, to instill a set of values that allows everybody to cooperate. That just sort of is almost by definition kind of stifling to the and this is sort of like spiritually what BAP is getting at with Bronze Age mindset, is like that success itself, the social success, the success of the state, sort of hems in or confines the sort of natural animal impulse to breed, because your kids don't really belong to you. They don't belong to they belong to the state. They belong to their friends. They belong or they belong to themselves. Like that's the increasingly common logic of raising families, is like, my kids are going to go have their own life that has nothing to do with me. And so why would I put all the work in to build that up and just fire it and forget it? And it's not to be clear, that's not to say that parents used to raise kids so they would have farm labor, or so they would have somebody to wipe their ass when they were old. Like, that's not what it is. It's deeper than that. It's about do I actually belong to something, and does it belong to me? Does my family, my clan, my dynasty, am I actually connected to that? And do I actually participate in the success or failure of that thing? Or is my last name just a name? And so I think part of the way that we get back to it is what's already happening, which is, and this is the extent to which it is kind of self-correcting, the capacity of these modern societies to ideologize their populations and to get them on board with a single worldview, that is actually failing, collapsing. And go ahead.
So, sorry, I want to let you finish that thought first, but I have an idea I want to get back to. Sorry, back to you, Kevin.
Okay. Yeah. So as that falls apart, people are looking around for what, if it's not what I grew up learning about in social studies, or what I grew up learning about, on TV, or the sort of organs of mind control, so to speak, have been telling me, then what is the answer? And so you got people going back to church, which is, I think, is a really good thing. You got people getting super into politics, which that's a mixed bag. And then you've got what I think is the fundamental, I think the sort of last psychological architecture we have left to us that actually still behaves more or less in the way that it did prior to liberalism, is the relationship between parent and child. It's a distinctly hierarchical relationship. It's uncomplicatedly loyal and rational in a way that even romantic relationships kind of no longer are. And so I see that as if you want to rebuild the sort of pre-postmodern psychological architecture of a functional society, you have to start with what's still standing. And I think that's one of the last things standing.
Yeah, I think you're right. So there are several things there. Your comments about the kind of the decreasing level to which moderns have a say in how their children are raised and educated. To me, it very much reminds me of Ted Kaczynski, right? The idea of losing out on what he calls the power process, which is basically how many decisions do you make during a day that actually affect your life. So in Kaczynski's line of reasoning, and I should say, more of a fan of his writing than his performance art, but nonetheless, what he says is basically, because we have been so removed from actual physical want, the vast majority of what we do doesn't really matter to our day-to-day life, right? So you have an email job and you fire off some messages, open Excel, scroll around for a few hours. Like, to what level does your performance of that task affect your life? Well, in kind of vague, abstract sense, it does, right? If you're really bad at your job, and you probably have to be pretty bad, someone might notice, you might get put on a performance improvement plan and then let go, right? That might happen, which would certainly affect you, but that's pretty abstract, right? If you compare that to your ancestors living a subsistence agricultural existence, right? If you don't plow the fields, there will be no food, right? If you don't repair the fences, all of your cattle, all of your wealth will go away, right? So it's a very real sort of struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something similar that's happened to child rearing. And I say this as someone who does not have children. So if your answer, Kevin, is you don't know what you're talking about, fair enough, right? Where more and more and more that relationship is abstracted, right? You send your kids to school. There's a good chance your wife works, and so she doesn't see the kids. You may have to pay for daycare. And I certainly, look, I get it. That's a position people are in. It simply is a fact of life. But that means, right, that you have comparatively a very small amount of say in how your kids turn out, right? Similarly, right?
Yes.
Mass media has basically brainwashed several generations of children into being very bizarre, broken people, right? You can see that in your generation. You can see that in mine. And if you've ever been to a public place, you have seen a Gen Alpha iPad kid with just a fried brain, right?
Yeah.
And all of those represent ways in which other people, other forces are making those decisions for you, right? So much like, right, the power process with a job, the available scope of how much you get to play a part in that is decreased. Now, I don't mean to say that, things are hard, therefore, walk out on your wife and give your kid an iPad, right? That's not what I'm saying at all. But, there's a similar degree to which, right, the kind of like the other institutions have kind of robbed that relationship of, a certain degree of meaning. I mean, you see something similar in, marriage and family formation, in dating, things like that, where these kind of like metastasized institutions have kind of robbed people of a say. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Everything is the top and the bottom against the middle, right? Like the state, the way that the state expands in power is by in pre-modern times, the state would expand by absorbing other states, right? Like you would sort of expand outward. Now that states have basically consumed the whole planet, and there sort of is no external enemy to fuel expansion. The state has to turn inward, and the way that it does that is by finding an oppressor and oppressed and taking the side of the oppressed, right? Taking the side of the weaker party on behalf, being the strongest, and taking the part of the weaker party against the stronger. And I mean, that's essentially what gay race communism is. That's where it comes from. Is the state looking for ways to expand the ambit of its authority by insinuating itself into some conflict where it can present itself as the savior. And children are sort of the last stop in that process. It's it's already long since happened with marriage. Marriage as a sort of natural human institution has been dead for at least a century. And the hierarchy of of nobility that was, you know, eradicated at the latest in the 19th century. The hierarchy of even hierarchies of class, the idea that you know, Zuckerberg wears hoodies, like that's entirely this process of leveling, flattening, hierarchies being consumed as fuel for the expansion of the state. And so, yeah, kids are the last stop. Kids are the last relationship that you have that is this sort of unreconstructed hierarchical. You know, you're in a position of basically absolute control, and the justification, or the way that relationship is justified or is made acceptable to ordinary people intuitively, is that it's based on love, right? And so you don't, you know, you could mistreat your kids, you just don't, right? And that process, that sort of used to be the case with all sorts of relationships, that you could not be observed, you could not, like there has been no state, um at any time prior to the 20th century, that had the level of surveillance and enforcement powers that our state has. And so there were so many relationships, so many power dynamics that, like, no one could intervene with. Nobody could intercede. Like, the power dynamic just was what it was. And if you were a tyrant, you got to be a tyrant. And, you know, if you were a good leader, you got to be a good leader. And, like, that freedom, the freedom of hierarchy, the freedom of being in a position of authority, is exactly what has been eradicated. And so, and, like, for explicable reasons, like, it's not, you know, when people made laws about, like, you know, don't beat your wife and don't starve your kids and don't, like these are not crazy things for people to say, like, hey, we're not going to tolerate that around here, right? But it is exactly that emotional impulse that leads to this bigger problem of flattening and the abolition of hierarchy. And so, I guess I've lost the thread of your original question, but it was something to do with with oh geez, now I've completely lost it. What were we talking about?
Yeah, no worries. Basically, we were talking about you know, kind of synthesizing an argument from Kaczynski about the power process, right?
Yes. And so yes, that's what I'm describing, is that you're alienated from, basically our definition of freedom is fully reciprocal. It's fully, like, egalitarian freedom. Everyone's free to do what they want to do, and no one's free to make anybody else do anything. And children are sort of a hypocritical carve out of that construct. It's like, which is why there's age gap discourse, and which is why there's, you know, the trans kid phenomenon. The reason that that's the fighting line is because there is this fundamental hypocrisy in, like, yeah, we're all egalitarian, we're all free to choose, and your right to swing your arms ends at my face. Like, that model of liberty completely breaks down when you're talking about kids, because kids are stupid and don't, like, they can't make these decisions for themselves. They have to have guidance, they have to have hierarchy. And so we've sort of said, like, okay, well, that's the one exception, but that's not philosophically coherent. And so anyone who wants to expand their authority, like a school guidance counselor or a teacher or a trans activist or any of these, or CPS, you know, anyone who wants to expand their power can point to that hypocrisy and say, like, whoa, what, you know, who made you in charge of that kid? What if you're bad at making those decisions? I should be making those decisions. And so, yeah, we're sort of staring down the barrel of the final abolition of any ability to sort of influence your environment in a way that's decisive. And yeah, kids are the last stop.
Well, you mentioned earlier, right, that idea of, how does the political system increase its power, right? And it's by breaking down certain social bonds. And I
Right.
think you're right to basically, look at this kind of entropy, right, and track, from the French Revolution, right, the breaking the bonds between, church and state all the way up through kind of, the 20th century. And realistically, like parent and child is one of the few bonds left. And, to see the insane forces kind of arrayed against that, right? The idea that, as in Canada, right, the state can, take your kids from you if you're, insufficiently, you know, supportive of their transition,
Right.
really is the expression of that. And when we're talking about liberal ideas, right, kind of at the core of it is the idea of informed consent, right? My right to, reason my way to a position and then choose that position.
Right.
I mean, that concept of freedom is, you know, not what you and I say when we mean freedom, right?
Right.
That's a term that you know contains layers to it. And
Yeah.
it's actually one of the things that I've noticed, with dismay in, the American conservative movement, right? Is this kind of, as some have called it, like barstool conservatism, right? Which is we hate woke because woke restricts my ability to, fire off my pleasure receptors in the way that I want to, right?
Right.
I want to go back to, you know, 2000s, Paul Rudd style. That's existence, right? That's the end goal. And when I'm looking forward, right, at kind of what fractures are coming, because I think that the right is about as unified as it is going to be for the foreseeable future. I mean, I think there are a number of lines there, and a number of kind of like future, you know, fronts. And one of them, I think, is going to be the disagreement over, what is the point of freedom, right? Is the point of freedom, like we said, just kind of a certain level of hedonism, or is it, your ability to, live a virtuous life? And in all of this, kind of like a through line in is effectively, and this is ironically enough, something that, kind of like the very early, anti-woke people pointed out, right? That, the purpose of life, right? The thing that, gets you out of that kind of, self-destructive, navel gazing Ouroboros is not the ability to make more choices, right? The ability to pick whatever combination of stacked genitalia you so desire, right?
Mhm.
It is a sort of a submission to something greater than yourself, right? A giving yourself over to things that make demands of you. And I think that it's no accident, right, that people who, take on those bonds, whether it be marriage or children or religion, tend to be significantly to the right of those who don't. You can track the difference in voting patterns on married versus unmarried women or women with children. Let alone, shall we say, routine religious attenders. How's that for a wordy way to describe it? But
Yeah.
again, right, it is that, the thing that gets you out of that kind of like horrible, nihilist spiral that we were describing earlier, right? The kind of like, Reddit bugman screed. Well, it's not more freedom, right? It's not more choices to make. In kind of a paradoxical way, it is less.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the biggest elements of this is just like, what does informed consent mean with some of these decisions? Like, it, I've heard liberals and sort of leftists make the argument that, like, you know, uh, marriage itself, like, it's impossible to consent to marriage on an informed basis. That it's impossible to consent to having children or being born on an informed basis. And, like, that's basically right. Like, just, points to them. Uh, you cannot consent to those things in an informed way because you can't understand until you do them. And that is, I just sort of view that as a strike against the concept, against the structure, the framework of informed consent. Like, it's just, clearly the wrong way to look at it. Um, and yeah, so it's freedom is sort of, it's definitely more than just, I get to do whatever, tickles my pleasure receptors. And probably the easiest way to think about that I've heard is like the analogy of a nude beach, right? Like if I want to bring my kids to the family beach, and I live right down the street from the beach, and they make it a nude beach, it's like, well, am I more free or less free? It's like, well, it depends on what I want to do, right? If what I want to do is see boobs, then yeah, I'm more free. But if what I want is to like raise a family and have a good day at the beach and like not have my kids stare at boobs, then like I'm substantially less free. And so freedom, yeah, is really it's dependent on what you want to do. And who was I listening to? Oh, it was Warren McIntyre. He's talking about uh, belief in power, and how so many conservatives and libertarians have sort of rejected the idea of power because they've lived in a world in which they were sort of flowing with the current of power. And then the postmodernists come along and they say, well, wait a minute, all these sexual rules and all these, the relationship between men and women, and the relationship between employers and employees and parents and children, those are all power constructs. Those are all things that you decided on, or somebody decided on, that like happen to align with your priorities and your beliefs and your values and your prejudices, but not mine. And so, I recognize them for what they are, which is power constructs. And what has happened since then, not to recapitulate his whole argument, but like what has happened since then is that postmodernists took control. We've sort of become a society run the way they like things run. And now conservatives and libertarians have this choice where they can either say, like, oh, this is all power. This is all this raw, naked, coercive force, and what I'm opposed to is force. What I'm opposed to is coercion and things getting in the way of my ability to make a damn choice. Um, because I'm for freedom. Or they can sort of be an adult about it and say, like, well, yeah, somebody has always decided what a default sexual relationship looks like. Somebody has always decided what child rearing looks like. Someone has always decided what the sort of acceptable terms of employment are. Those have always been power processes. And instead of me saying, nobody should set those defaults, nobody should be in charge, nobody should deploy force against anybody, maybe we should be in charge, and maybe we should, organize society in a way that actually leads to flourishing. And so, it's fairly obvious which side I stand on that. But like, yeah, that's when you're flowing with the current of power, it's easy to pretend it doesn't exist, but it always exists.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point, right? Is it's very easy to make fun of conservatives for being losers, right? Uh, and look, I engage in it much the same as anyone else, but it is true, right? That kind of like beaten in pattern of losing is very deeply buried. And the problem is, right, you need to shed that mentality, right? It's understandable, but no longer helpful. And that, that reluctance towards power was probably tactically helpful, right? It goes back to, the old line, like, when you were in power, I asked for mercy. And when I was in power, I offered none. But the problem is, it's like, well, okay, you have power, you have some of it, right? Not all of it, maybe not enough of it, but more than you've had. And, the desire to basically turn around and say, all right, well, we can throw the ring into Mount Doom, destroy power. Well, fundamentally, that's not how it works, right? Authority is sort of like energy in the sense that it can really never be created or destroyed. It is simply transferred. And, like many other things, I think that is an idea that needs to be left in the 20th century, right? That is an old paradigm, no longer useful. And
Yeah.
look, obviously my point is not to say new things are inherently better, far from it. But, that way of viewing things is just completely and totally inadequate. Kevin, we are fast coming up on time. I really appreciate you coming out to talk. Do you want to give more details about your conference? I know we talked about the issue of of pronatalism quite a bit, but I want to know more about the event you're putting on.
Yeah, we were very abstract. So yeah, it's going to be March 28th and 29th. We're going to have a dinner on the 28th with some speakers, and then a full conference on the 29th, which will be kind of in this speaker unconference type format where you'll be able to hear a couple speakers and then have like a discussion session. Given the price point of the tickets and the type of people that we attracted last year, it's going to be an incredibly interesting group. The level of commitment to this issue in particular, and sort of knowledge and expertise in general is just extraordinarily high. And yeah, it's going to be at the Bullock Texas History Museum and the AT&T Conference Center down here in Austin. And yeah, so you can use offer code JBurden to get 10% off your ticket. And yeah, it's natalism.org.
Well, and you should definitely do that, because as a shill, right, as just a money grubbing influencer, I get a kickback. And to be honest, look, this whole thing is a giant scam. It's been a long 2-year gambit to get a discount code at a conference I didn't know about when I started the podcast. So in all seriousness, you should go to that conference. I heard very good things about it from some of the attendees at the first one. Even if not this one, go to these IRL events. They're a ton of fun. You meet people. Look, I'll be honest, I have my I won't say that. I don't want to go too information. Quite a lot about my life has changed for the better because of people that I have met, off the internet in real life. So I'd highly recommend that. Again, Kevin, thank you so much for your time. As far as my links, you can find the Jay Burden Show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to support us, obviously the link for the Pronatalist conference down in the description. That's a great way to do it. There are also crypto links and my other sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching, which is also associated with Exit Group. Highly recommend both of those services. And to everyone at home, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.